to truly begin to have the infrastructure, not just the gardens. And that's what permaculture needs to evolve between this period where right now it's a popular movement as a nut tree movement, as a fruit movement, but not as something that's really being looked to by architects, by designers, by people who are wanting to say, but what do your plans look like when we draw them out on a particular place? Are they something that makes me want to build it? And that's the kind of thing where we do team design. I'm not saying all permaculture designers need to be great draftspeople, but I'm saying let's create teams where we get good draftspeople and create some awesome, beautiful images of regional models of economic development that make people want to jump at them. And what I'm saying is that Rainwater, as a key part of that infrastructural retrofit in the northeastern corridor, is easy, low-hanging fruit as a good design idea for pretty much any place you can point your finger at. There pretty much is no place that wouldn't benefit from incorporating rainwater capture in some way, shape, or form. So that's why we're taking that as a breakout thing to say, okay, so what's the simple, low-tech, low-cost way to do it? I'm not trying to say that I think plastic is something that we shouldn't eschew. Quite the contrary. I do think that plastic is something that we should be smart and vigilant about the fact that it is nothing but a toxic legacy. My point here is that I'm splitting hairs and doing the best I can when I say to you that for an interim plan, I think that plastic cisterns are a good alternative when you make sure they're in the shade, when you make sure they don't get scarified. Those are key things, because with plastics, the key things that cause us to get unacceptably high endocrine disruptor exposure, which is the concern with plastics, and a real one. Those endocrine disruptors release much more from soft plastics, release much more when soft plastics get hot, and release even more when you scratch them with some kind of spoon or something. Right? So in other words, if you're not like sticking a metal spoon in your plastic cistern and having it sit out in the middle of a field and get baked, your exposure rate is not going to be as high as if you paid no attention to those things and have your cistern get really baked. Don't plant any vines over it. Don't help it to stay shaded, right? Those are important things to think about with plastic when we're using it for something like water storage. Another level of concern, if I were going to drink water from a plastic tank, I might put it through a ceramic filter. The reason why ceramic is such an awesome filtration is because clay has such tight cell structures that other complex molecules can't make it through clay. So things like organochlorines, things like hydrocarbons, things like bacteria can't make it through clay filters. That's why clay, especially clay infused with colloidal silver, is probably, I think, one of your best ways to moderate and mitigate the exposure at the end of the pipe with what's happening with municipal water supply. Yeah.
Can I just ask a question about the plastic? Are you saying water that's stored in a plastic cistern, even if you're using it on plants, it's going to have high endocrine structures if it's in the sun or not protected?
Right. Now, I wouldn't say that endocrine disruptors in soil on plants are going to cause a problem once a human being ingests them.
Okay.
Because endocrine disruptors are the kind of things that soil microbes can eat pretty readily. There's a distinction here to how to navigate through a lot of this chemistry stuff and pollution exposure is to realize that heavy metals and elementals are very problematic pollutants, top priority to be concerned about. Radioactive isotopes, top priority to be concerned about. But when we get into some of these organochlorines and petrochemicals, and don't get me wrong here and think I'm making light about them, because what I'm going to say about them chemistry-wise doesn't address the payload that we're being inundated with. So while it is the case that soil microbes and living systems can actually eat things that are large-scale hydrocarbons and organochlorines, this is why Paul Stamets has been hired by Department of Defense to use mushrooms to mitigate nerve gas that has been a contamination on military bases. Right? That because mycelium can actually eat nerve gas. But mycelium cannot eat lead and mercury. Mycelium cannot eat uranium. And what it will be able to do is sequester it. And so the people in Chernobyl are getting very high exposures to uranium because they eat a lot of mushrooms. And it turns out that, in fact, the mycelium is what's effectively sequestering the radioactive isotopes in the fallout from Chernobyl. And so in one way you could say, well, then we could just let the mushrooms be, but what's happening is, of course, the cultures that live there have a tradition of eating mushrooms, and so they're getting some fairly high exposures because it turns out that the mycelium are actually sequestering. Now, sequestration is the best we can do with phytoremediation and living systems digestion of pollutants on site, meaning that now it's concentrated in a plant or in a substance, which is now toxic, and now we can maybe take it off site.
But I live in the toxic state of California, and I store my water in plastic, and I want to make sure that that rainwater is not going to give my daughter, who's young, any high exposure to influenza.
Then
Am I doing okay?
a ceramic filter is what I would suggest.
But the water's just going into the garden. We're not drinking it.
Oh, again, we're back to irrigation, not ingestion.
Not ingestion.
You'd be
Not
fine.
all.
That's what I'm saying, is that if you're doing with irrigation, the soil microbes are actually going to digest
Great.
that, and it's not getting taken up in your vegetables.
That's what I
Can I-
wanted to know.
Can
Thank you.
I- But isn't it also true, though, that depending upon what other species might eat it, for example, if you had chickens that were digesting, some of them, the bugs, and those toxins will bioaccumulate up the food chain and
No, endocrine
concentrate.
disruptors don't bioaccumulate.
In fact, they're fat soluble.
I mean, DDT and dioxin, and those are, but those are not the naphtalates that are coming off of the plastic.
Right.
Those are more the byproducts of making
Right.
like herbicides
I was speaking
and
of
pesticides.
dioxins and the...
Yeah. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, it's splitting hairs, and it's better to just like assume that it is something that could be problematic and
Yeah.
figure out strategies to mitigate that.
On the island, we never drink